At 0930 hours on June 9, 1944, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. sat in the cockpit of his P-47 Thunderbolt at Ramitelli Airfield in Italy, preparing for a mission that would change everything. 39 P-47s with bright red tails were taxiing into position for what would become the 332nd Fighter Group's most important escort mission yet. Davis was 31 years old. He had graduated from West Point in 1936 after 4 years of complete social isolation. No white cadet had spoken to him except when officially required. He had eaten every meal alone. He had no roommate. The academy had tried to break him through silence. He refused to break. Now he commanded the only all-black fighter group in the United States Army Air Forces. The mission briefing that morning had been clear. Escort B, 24 Liberators, of the 5th Bombardment Wing to Munich, Germany. Protect them from German fighters. Bring them home. The 15th Air Force had been losing bombers at a devastating rate. On average, 46 bombers under fighter escort were being shot down by enemy aircraft on missions like this one. 46. Every heavy bomber carried a crew of 10 men. Davis knew the problem. Heavy bombers were slow, heavily armed targets. B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators flew in tight formations at 25,000 feet, heading deep into German territory to bomb factories, oil refineries, and rail yards. The Luftwaffe would send up dozens, sometimes hundreds of fighters to intercept them. And the American fighter escorts were not staying with the bombers. Fighter doctrine emphasized aggressive pursuit of enemy aircraft. General Jimmy Doolittle had changed 8th Air Force policy in January 1944, ordering fighters to pursue and destroy the Luftwaffe wherever they found them. The goal was to win air superiority before the Normandy invasion. It worked for that strategic purpose, but it left bombers vulnerable during the actual attacks. Most fighter groups would engage German fighters and pursue them away from the bomber formations, sometimes for miles. The tactical logic made sense from a fighter pilot's perspective. Destroy enemy aircraft. Remove the threat. But during the chase, other German fighters would attack the now unprotected bombers from different angles. The bomber losses proved the cost of this approach. The 332nd Fighter Group would operate differently. Davis had made that decision weeks earlier. His pilots would stay with the bombers. They would engage only German fighters directly threatening the formations. They would not pursue enemy aircraft away from their assigned positions. Discipline over aggression, protection over pursuit. Bring the bombers home. The 99th Fighter Squadron deployed to North Africa in April 1943. The squadron arrived at Oued Inja airfield in French Morocco on April 24th. They were equipped with Curtiss P-40L Warhawk fighters, a capable but not cutting-edge aircraft. The P-40 was reliable, heavily armed with 650 caliber machine guns, but it was slower and less maneuverable than the latest German fighters. The squadron was attached to the 33rd Fighter Group, commanded by Colonel William Momier. Momier made clear from the beginning that he had no confidence in black pilots. He segregated the 99th from the white squadrons in every respect. When experienced flight leaders normally accompanied new squadrons on their first missions to provide guidance, Momier refused to do so for the 99th. Their first combat mission on June 2, 1943, was a patrol over the Mediterranean Sea. The first time any 99th pilot encountered enemy fire was the first time the entire squadron encountered combat. No experienced pilots flew with them to show them what to expect. The 99th moved to Tunisia, then to Sicily as the Allied campaign advanced. They flew ground support missions, strafing enemy positions, escorting medium bombers, and patrolling coastlines. On July 2, 1943, First Lieutenant Charles Hall made history. The squadron was escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers to Castelvetrano in southwestern Sicily. German Focke-Wulf 190 fighters rose to intercept the bombers. Hall engaged one of the German fighters. He maneuvered behind it, fired his 650 caliber machine guns, and watched the Focke-Wulf crash into the Mediterranean Sea. It was the first aerial victory by a black American military pilot. General Dwight Eisenhower personally sent congratulations. But the victories came slowly. The 99th flew hundreds of missions through the summer and fall of 1943. They provided close air support for Allied ground forces during the invasion of Sicily. They flew patrols. They escorted bombers. They attacked ground targets. The work was dangerous and exhausting. Pilots flew multiple missions per day. Aircraft maintenance crews worked around the clock, keeping the P-40s operational in harsh conditions. Colonel Momier remained hostile. In September 1943, he wrote a report claiming the 99th had underperformed. His report reached Major General Edwin House, commander of the 12th Air Support Command. House wrote his own memorandum on September 16, 1943. The memorandum stated that, based on the performance of the 99th Fighter Squadron to date, it is the opinion of this command that they are not of the fighting caliber of any squadron in this command. The memorandum also included the statement that the consensus of opinion seems to be that the Negro type has not the proper reflexes to make a first-class fighter pilot. The House memorandum reached the War Department. It could have ended the Tuskegee experiment. Davis, who had returned to the United States in September 1943 to take command of the 332nd Fighter Group, learned about the memorandum. He immediately went to Washington to defend his pilots. He presented evidence to the War Department. He held a press conference at the Pentagon. He argued that the 99th had received no special treatment, had been given difficult missions with inadequate support, and had performed as well as could be expected under those circumstances. He pointed out that Momier's report was based on prejudice, not evidence. The War Department commissioned a study. The study, completed in March 1944, examined the 99th's actual combat record in detail. It found that the squadron had performed comparably to other squadrons in the theater. The study noted that the 99th had faced unique challenges due to segregation and lack of support from their attached group commander. The study recommended that the Tuskegee program continue and expand. Momier's attempt to shut down black aviation had failed. Then came Anzio. On January 27th and 28th, 1944, 15 pilots from the 99th engaged a large force of German fighters over the beachhead. Flying outdated P-40 Warhawks against superior Focke-Wulf 190s, they shot down 13 enemy aircraft in 2 days without losing a single pilot. Captain Charles Hall destroyed 2 aircraft on January 28th, earning the Distinguished Flying Cross. The report calling for the 99th's removal was quietly buried. Meanwhile, back in the United States, the Army was forming additional black fighter squadrons. The 100th Fighter Squadron activated at Tuskegee in February 1942. The 301st Fighter Squadron activated in October 1942. The 302nd Fighter Squadron activated in March 1943. In October 1943, these 3 squadrons were combined to form the 332nd Fighter Group with Lieutenant Colonel Davis as commanding officer. The group trained at Selfridge Field, Michigan through late 1943. They received their aircraft, Bell P-39 Airacobra fighters. The P-39 was an unusual design with the engine mounted behind the pilot and a 37mm cannon firing through the propeller hub. It had been used primarily for ground attack missions in the Pacific. It was not the most advanced fighter available, but it was what the 332nd received. In December 1943, the 332nd deployed to Italy. They arrived at Montecorvino Airfield near Salerno in February 1944. The 99th Fighter Squadron, which had been operating independently, was supposed to join the 332nd. But there were delays. The 99th continued operating with the 79th Fighter Group through the spring. The 332nd began flying combat missions in February 1944. They flew ground support missions, attacking German positions in support of Allied ground forces. The P-39s were effective for strafing and bombing, but not ideal for air-to-air combat. In May 1944, the group received new aircraft, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts. The P-47 was a massive fighter, weighing over 7 tons fully loaded. It was rugged, heavily armed with 850 caliber machine guns, and could absorb tremendous battle damage. But it was not as maneuverable as lighter fighters. The group moved to Ramitelli Airfield on the Adriatic coast of Italy on May 28, 1944. Ramitelli was a forward base, close to enemy territory. The conditions were primitive. The runway was metal matting laid over dirt. The pilots and ground crews lived in tents. Dust covered everything. But the location was ideal for bomber escort missions, which required the fighters to reach deep into enemy territory. On June 7, 1944, the 99th Fighter Squadron finally joined the 332nd. Now Davis commanded 4 squadrons, the 99th, 100th, 301st, and 302nd. The 332nd Fighter Group was at full strength, and just in time. On June 8th, the group received orders for its first heavy bomber escort mission. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was born December 18, 1912, in Washington, D.C. His father, Benjamin O. Davis, Sr., was one of only 2 black combat officers in the United States Army at that time. The senior Davis would later become the Army's first black general in October 1940. Benjamin Jr. grew up in a military family that understood both service and the barriers created by segregation. At age 13, Davis attended a barnstorming exhibition at Bowling Field in Washington. A pilot offered him a ride. The experience set Davis on a path toward military aviation, though he would face years of obstacles because of his race. He attended Central High School in Cleveland, Ohio, where his father was stationed, graduating in 1929 at the top of his class. After brief periods at Western Reserve University and the University of Chicago, Davis received a nomination to the United States Military Academy at West Point from Illinois, Congressman Oscar DePriest, the only black member of Congress at that time. Davis entered West Point in July 1932. He was the first black cadet to attend in the 20th century. What followed were 4 years of systematic isolation. White cadets refused to speak to him except when military protocol required it. He had no roommate. He ate every meal alone at a table for 10. Other cadets deliberately excluded him from every social activity. The academy's culture attempted to force him out through silence. The practice was called silencing, an unofficial but deliberate form of hazing designed to break cadets the institution did not want. Davis refused to leave. He studied. He trained. He followed every regulation. In June 1936, he graduated ranked 35th in his class of 276. He was West Point's fourth black graduate in history, the first in nearly 50 years. Davis wanted to fly. The Army Air Corps rejected his application. No black flying units existed, so no positions were available for black officers in aviation. He was assigned to the 24th Infantry Regiment, one of the Army's Buffalo Soldier units at Fort Benning, Georgia. He was not allowed inside the base officers' club because of his race. In June 1937, he attended infantry school at Fort Benning. In 1939, he was assigned to teach military tactics at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, the same assignment his father had received years earlier. It was the Army's way of keeping black officers away from commanding white troops. Everything changed in 1941. President Franklin Roosevelt, responding to pressure from civil rights organizations and black newspapers, ordered the War Department to create a black flying unit. The political pressure came from multiple sources. The Pittsburgh Courier newspaper had launched a Double V campaign calling for victory against fascism abroad and victory against racism at home. Civil rights organizations argued that if America was going to fight for democracy in Europe, it needed to practice democracy at home. Roosevelt, facing an election and needing black votes, pushed the military to act. The War Department complied reluctantly. In March 1941, the Army activated the 99th Pursuit Squadron at Chanute Field, Illinois. The squadron moved to Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama for flight training. The location was chosen because Tuskegee Institute, a historically black college, had an established civilian pilot training program. The Army contracted with the institute to provide facilities and support. The experiment, as many called it, was designed to fail. Military leaders who opposed integration believed black men lacked the intelligence and reflexes to fly high-performance fighters. A 1925 War College study had concluded that black soldiers were inherently inferior. Many senior officers still believed that conclusion in 1941. They expected the Tuskegee training program to prove black men could not fly. Then the issue would be settled. But the program did not fail. The first class of aviation cadets, Class 42-C-SE, began training in July 1941. Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. was among them. He was already an experienced officer with 5 years of service, but he had never flown. He learned alongside 4 other cadets: Second Lieutenant Charles DeBow, Jr., Second Lieutenant Mac Ross, Second Lieutenant Lemuel Custis, Captain George Roberts. On March 6, 1942, all 5 men graduated. They became the first black military pilots in American history. The Army needed a black West Point graduate to command the squadron. Davis was the only active black academy graduate. In July 1942, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel and named commander of the 99th Pursuit Squadron. The squadron continued training through 1942, flying North American AT-6 Texan trainers and Curtiss P-40 Warhawk fighters. More classes graduated, more pilots earned their wings. By early 1943, the 99th had accumulated enough trained pilots and support personnel to deploy overseas. The 332nd flew P-47 Thunderbolts on early escort missions, but the group transitioned to the North American P-51 Mustang in early July 1944. The Mustang revolutionized their capabilities. It was one of the finest fighter aircraft ever built. Powered by a Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine producing over 1,400 horsepower, the Mustang could reach speeds exceeding 440 miles per hour. More importantly, with drop tanks, it had a combat radius of over 750 miles. That meant the 332nd could now escort bombers to any target in the Mediterranean theater and still have fuel to fight and return home. The Mustang was armed with 6 50-caliber Browning M2 machine guns, 3 in each wing, with 1,800 rounds of ammunition total. The guns were reliable, hard-hitting, and accurate. The aircraft handled beautifully. Pilots found it responsive, stable, and forgiving. It would turn with anything except perhaps the most maneuverable Japanese fighters, and it was much faster than those lightweight aircraft. Against the German Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s, the P-51 was a superb dogfighter. When the Mustangs arrived, the ground crews painted the tail sections bright red, maintaining the identification marking system from the Thunderbolts. The red tails were distinctive and easily recognizable, which was exactly the point. In the crowded skies over Europe, bomber crews and fighter pilots needed to identify friend from foe instantly. The color coding system worked. the 31st Fighter Group's red and white striped tails, the 52nd Fighter Group's yellow tails, the 325th Fighter Group's black and yellow checkerboard tails, and the 332nd's solid red tails could all be distinguished at a glance. Davis had very specific tactical doctrines for his pilots. He briefed them repeatedly before missions. Their primary responsibility was bomber protection, not aerial victories. Other fighter groups were being encouraged to pursue German fighters aggressively, to destroy the Luftwaffe in the air wherever they found them. This was part of General Doolittle's strategy in the 8th Air Force operating from England. Destroy the German fighter force before D-Day. It was sound strategy at the theater level, but Davis believed that for the 332nd, a different approach was necessary. His group was being judged by standards no white group faced. Any failure would be used as evidence that black pilots were inadequate. Excellence was mandatory, and excellence meant bringing bombers home. Davis told his pilots they would engage German fighters attacking the bomber formations. They would fight aggressively when engaged, but they would not abandon their positions to chase enemy aircraft away from the bombers. If a German fighter broke off an attack and fled, let him go. Return to the formation, maintain position, be ready for the next attack. This doctrine frustrated some pilots. Fighter pilots wanted kills. Aerial victories were how you proved yourself. 5 kills made you an ace, a title that brought recognition and respect. But Davis was unmoved. He told his pilots that 10 men rode in every heavy bomber. Every bomber they saved meant 10 Americans went home. That was more important than any individual aerial victory. The mission was bomber protection. Everything else was secondary. On June 8, 1944, the 332nd flew its first heavy bomber escort mission to Pola, Italy. 39 P-47 Thunderbolts escorted B-17s of the 5th Bombardment Wing. The mission was uneventful. No German fighters appeared. The bombers hit their target and returned safely. But the mission established operational procedures. The 332nd learned how to coordinate with bomber formations, how to position their squadrons for maximum defensive coverage, and how to communicate with bomber leaders during missions. The real test came the next day, June 9, 1944. Davis led the group on their second escort mission. The target was Munich, Germany, a heavily defended city deep in German territory. Intelligence warned that more than 100 German fighters could be expected. The Luftwaffe had strong forces in southern Germany and would certainly contest a daylight raid on Munich. The 332nd launched 39 P-47s from Ramitelli. The mission profile called for the fighters to rendezvous with the bombers over the Adriatic Sea, escort them across northern Italy and into Germany, provide protection over the target, and escort them back to the rally point. The formation assembled smoothly. The bombers, B-24 Liberators from multiple groups in the 5th Bombardment Wing, flew in their standard box formations. Multiple groups stacked vertically, each group offset horizontally from the others to avoid mid-air collisions and to provide interlocking fields of fire from their defensive machine guns. The 332nd positioned their squadrons around the bomber stream. Some flew high and to the sides, watching for attacks from above. Some flew slightly ahead, prepared to engage fighters approaching from the front. Some flew behind and below, covering the most vulnerable angles. As the formation crossed the Alps and entered German airspace, the Luftwaffe rose to meet them. Over Udine in northeastern Italy, radar stations detected the formation and scrambled fighters. Messerschmitt 109s from multiple Jagdgeschwader fighter wings climbed to intercept altitude. The German pilots were experienced. Many had been fighting since the early years of the war. They knew American tactics. They knew how to exploit weaknesses in bomber formations. They had shot down hundreds of American bombers over the past 2 years. The Messerschmitt 109s attacked from multiple directions. Some came from high altitude, diving through the formation to build up speed. Others attacked from the sides, trying to catch bombers at the edge of the formations where defensive fire was less concentrated. Still others came from below, where the bomber gunners had limited fields of fire. It was coordinated, professional, and dangerous. Davis gave the order, engage. The Red Tails intercepted the German fighters. Second Lieutenant Clarence Allen spotted a Messerschmitt diving toward the bombers. He rolled his P-47 into a pursuit curve, closed to firing range, and triggered his .850 caliber machine guns. The Messerschmitt's engine exploded. The German aircraft fell away, trailing smoke. Allen did not pursue. He pulled up and returned to his position, covering the bombers. First Lieutenant Melvin Jackson engaged another Messerschmitt approaching from the side. Jackson had been one of the graduates from the early Tuskegee classes. He had combat experience from the 99th's operations in North Africa and Sicily. He knew how to lead a target, how to judge deflection angles, how to put rounds on a fast-moving aircraft. His burst caught the Messerschmitt in the fuselage. The German aircraft broke off its attack and dove away. Jackson confirmed it destroyed. First Lieutenant Wendell Pruitt, who would later become famous for attacking a German destroyer with his wingman, got the third kill. Pruitt was an aggressive, skilled pilot. He engaged a Messerschmitt head-on, a tactic that required nerve and precise shooting. Both aircraft fired at each other as they closed at a combined speed of over 600 miles per hour. Pruitt's rounds hit first. The Messerschmitt exploded. Pruitt flew through the debris cloud and immediately looked for his next target. But he also kept track of where the bombers were. He did not chase German fighters away from his assigned position. First Lieutenant Charles Bussey shot down the fourth Messerschmitt. Second Lieutenant Frederick Funderburg destroyed 2 German fighters, bringing the day's total to 5. Confirmed aerial victories. It was the 332nd Fighter Group's first kills in bomber escort operations. The pilots had proven they could fight, but Davis's tactical doctrine also showed its value. Throughout the engagement, the Red Tails maintained their positions relative to the bomber formation. When they engaged German fighters, they did so because those fighters were attacking the bombers. After scoring kills, the Red Tail pilots immediately returned to their defensive positions. They did not pursue fleeing German aircraft. They did not chase the Messerschmitts that broke off attacks and fled toward German bases. Some German fighters escaped that might have been killed if the 332nd had pursued them, but the bombers remained protected throughout the mission. 2 B-24 Liberators from the 459th Bombardment Group were shot down by German fighters that managed to get through the defensive screen. 60 men were aboard those bombers. Some may have survived and become prisoners of war. Others certainly died. But given the intensity of the German attacks and the number of enemy fighters involved, the losses were relatively light. Without fighter escort, the bomber losses would have been much higher. The June 9th mission proved the concept. Staying with the bombers worked. The Red Tails continued escort missions through the summer. On July 12, 1944, they escorted B-24s to Nimes, France. German Focke-Wulf 190s attacked from above. 3 bombers from the 461st Bombardment Group were shot down, but the Red Tails prevented heavier losses by maintaining their defensive positions. Then came July 18, 1944. The mission was to escort B-17s of the 5th Bombardment Wing to Memmingen, Germany. Intelligence estimated heavy resistance. The 332nd launched 61 P-51 Mustangs. They had just transitioned to the faster, longer-range Mustang in early July. The red tail markings transferred from the P-47s to the new aircraft. Over northern Italy and southern Germany, approximately 100 to 150 German fighters attacked the formation in waves. Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s came from multiple directions and altitudes, trying to break up the bomber formations. The Red Tails engaged continuously, but the German attack was overwhelming. The air battle lasted nearly an hour. 15 bombers were shot down, 14 B-17s from the 483rd Bombardment Group, and 1 from the 301st Bombardment Group went down under the sustained German assault. The Red Tails fought hard that day. They shot down 12 German aircraft, their highest single-day total of the war. First, Lieutenant Lee Archer destroyed a Messerschmitt 109. Captain Joseph Ellsbury got another. Multiple pilots earned aerial and victory credits. But the sheer number of German fighters made it impossible to prevent all losses. Without the Red Tails' discipline in staying with the formations, the bomber casualties would have been catastrophic. Word began spreading through the 15th Air Force bomber groups. The Red Tails fought differently. They stayed in position. They did not chase German fighters away from the formations. Several bomber pilots who watched the July 18th engagement from other groups noticed the tactical discipline. The Red Tails were taking a different approach to escort duty. On August 24, 1944, First Lieutenant Charles McGee, flying with the 302nd Fighter Squadron, engaged German fighters while escorting B-17s to Pardubice Airdrome in Czechoslovakia. German Focke-Wulf 190s tried to penetrate the bomber formation. McGee's element was designated to chase them off. He followed one Focke-Wulf into a dive, stayed behind the German fighter, fired a sustained burst, and watched it crash. McGee immediately climbed back to rejoin the bomber formation. He did not pursue additional targets. He returned to his assigned position protecting the bombers. The pattern was consistent across missions. The Red Tails engaged German fighters, threatening the formations, then immediately returned to position. They did not chase enemy aircraft beyond the immediate threat. This tactical discipline resulted in fewer aerial victories compared to other fighter groups, but it resulted in fewer bomber losses. By autumn 1944, the statistics were becoming clear. The 15th Air Force flew bombers and fighters from different bases with little personal interaction. Escort assignments came from headquarters on a rotation basis. Bomber crews rarely, if ever, met their fighter escorts face to face. But they could identify the different fighter groups by their distinctive tail markings. The 332nd had solid red tails. The 31st Fighter Group had red and white striped tails. The 52nd Fighter Group had yellow tails. The 325th Fighter Group had black and yellow checkerboard tails. These markings helped bomber crews and fighters identify friend from foe in large formations. Some bomber crews began calling the 332nd the Red-Tailed Angels. The nickname appeared in period sources and near-period accounts. Whether bomber crews specifically requested the Red Tails as escorts is difficult to verify from available records. One documented exception occurred on December 29, 1944, when 18 B-24 Liberators were forced by bad weather to land at Ramitelli Airfield, the Red Tails' home base. 17 bombers came from the 485th Bombardment Group, one from the 455th Bombardment Group. The bomber crews spent 5 days with the Tuskegee Airmen, sharing meals and facilities at the crowded base. The 332nd left notes in each bomber explaining that the red-tailed escorts were there to protect them on their missions. Those bomber crews from the 485th and 455th groups would have had personal knowledge of the Red Tails after that experience. Meanwhile, German intelligence reports from late summer and autumn 1944 noted changes in American escort tactics. Luftwaffe after-action reports mentioned that certain P-51 groups with distinctive markings were staying closer to bomber formations and were more difficult to draw away from their positions. The reports did not always specify which groups, but German pilots were noticing that tactics which had worked earlier in the war were becoming less effective against some American escorts. The statistics confirmed what observers were seeing. The 332nd Fighter Group flew 179 bomber escort missions for the 15th Air Force between early June 1944 and late April 1945. They lost bombers to enemy aircraft on only 7 of those missions. The total number of bombers shot down by German fighters while under Red Tail escort was 27. The dates were June 9th, June 13th, July 12th, July 18th, July 20th in 1944, and March 24th, 1945. The 3 other P-51 Mustang fighter groups in the 15th Air Force, the 31st, 52nd, and 325th Fighter Groups, each lost an average of 46 bombers to enemy fighters during the same period. The Red Tails lost significantly fewer. The difference was tactical discipline. Staying with the bombers worked. The trade-off was that the Red Tails shot down fewer enemy aircraft than other fighter groups. The 332nd was credited with 112 aerial victories during the war. Other groups shot down more because they chased German fighters aggressively. The Red Tails did not produce a single ace, no pilot with 5 confirmed kills. Lieutenant Colonel Lee Archer came closest with 4 confirmed, though his 5th claim has been disputed for decades. But the Red Tails were not trying to produce aces. They were trying to bring bombers home. By that measure, they succeeded better than any other fighter group in the theater. On March 24, 1945, the 15th Air Force flew its longest and most dangerous escort mission of the war. The target was the Daimler-Benz tank factory in Berlin, 1,600 miles round trip. 5 fighter groups were assigned to escort the bombers. The 332nd launched P-51 Mustangs from Ramitelli, led by Colonel Davis himself. Sources vary on exact numbers, with reports indicating between 43 and 59 aircraft participated. As the bomber formation approached Berlin, German fighters rose to meet them. The Luftwaffe sent everything available. Propeller-driven Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s came up first. Then approximately 24 to 30 Messerschmitt 262 jet fighters attacked. The Me-262 was the fastest operational aircraft in the world, capable of 540 miles per hour, more than 100 miles per hour, faster than any Allied fighter. They were nearly impossible to catch in level flight. But the jets had one vulnerability. They were less maneuverable than conventional fighters. In a turning fight, a skilled pilot in a Mustang could force a jet into a disadvantageous position. 3 Red-Tail pilots succeeded that day. First Lieutenant Roscoe Brown of the 100th Fighter Squadron engaged in Me-262. He forced the German jet into a turn, got inside its turning radius, and fired a sustained burst that hit the jet's engines. The Messerschmitt exploded. The pilot was Oberleutnant Franz Kulp, a German ace with 10 confirmed victories. Kulp bailed out wounded but survived. Second Lieutenant Charles Brantley of the 100th Fighter Squadron shot down a second Me-262. The German pilot, Oberleutnant Ernst Werner, was killed in the engagement. First Lieutenant Earl Lane, also of the 100th Fighter Squadron, destroyed a third Me-262. The pilot, Feldwebel Erwin Ams, survived and was captured. 3 German jets destroyed in one mission. It was one of the most significant engagements between Tuskegee Airmen and the Luftwaffe's newest technology. But the mission came at a cost. 3 bombers were shot down by German fighters during the engagement. The Daimler-Benz factory was heavily damaged by the bombing raid, but men died to achieve that result. The 332nd Fighter Group was never officially recognized during the war for its superior bomber protection record. The group earned 3 Distinguished Unit Citations for operations over Sicily in May and June 1943, for actions at Monastery Hill near Cassino in May 1944, and for successfully fighting off German jet aircraft on March 24, 1945. But there was no specific commendation for the bomber escort record. In March 1945, 2 publications helped create a myth that would persist for decades. On March 10, 1945, Liberty magazine published an article by Roy Ottley titled Dark Angels of Doom, claiming the Tuskegee Airmen had not lost a bomber in more than 100 missions. 2 weeks later, on March 24, 1945, the Chicago Defender newspaper published an article stating that the 332nd had flown its 200th mission without losing a single bomber to enemy fighters. The article was based on incomplete information provided by the 15th Air Force Public Affairs Office. The claim was not accurate. 7 bombers had been shot down by German fighters under Red Tail escort on 7 different missions, but the myth took hold. For decades, the never lost a bomber claim was repeated in books, articles, films, and museum exhibits. It became part of the Tuskegee Airmen legend. Many people, including some Tuskegee Airmen themselves, came to believe it. The myth was not publicly challenged for many years. Mission reports were classified after the war. Few people had access to the primary documents. In the 1990s, Dr. Alan Grotman interviewed General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., and specifically asked him if the never lost a bomber statement was true. Davis replied that he questioned the statement, but that it had been repeated so many times people were coming to believe it. Davis himself knew the statement was not entirely accurate because his own Distinguished Flying Cross citation from June 9, 1944, specifically noted that despite the large number of enemy fighters, the bomber formation suffered only a few losses. Not 0 losses, a few losses. It was not until 2007 that the Air Force Historical Research Agency released a comprehensive report that definitively disproved the myth. Dr. Daniel Hallman, the agency's chief historian, examined mission reports from both the 332nd Fighter Group and the bombardment groups they escorted. He reviewed missing aircrew reports that documented which aircraft were lost, when and where they went down, and how they were destroyed. He cross-referenced this data with German fighter pilot claims. In his article published in the Alabama Review in January 2011, Hallman documented exactly which bombers were lost, on which dates, while under Tuskegee Airmen escort. His research confirmed what mission records showed, that the Tuskegee Airmen had the best bomber protection record of any fighter escort group in the Mediterranean theater. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. stayed in the military after the war. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the United States Armed Forces. Davis helped draft the Air Force's desegregation plan. He commanded fighter wings in Korea, flew F-86 Sabres in combat, and rose through the ranks. In 1954, he became the Air Force's first black brigadier general. In 1959, he became the first black major general. In 1965, the first black lieutenant general. He retired in 1970 after 33 years of service. On December 9, 1998, President Bill Clinton promoted Davis to 4-star general, the first black officer to receive that rank in retirement. Davis died on July 4, 2002, at age 89. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 2, near his father. Charles McGee, who shot down that Focke-Wulf 190 in August 1944, stayed in the Air Force. He flew missions in Korea and Vietnam. Total combat missions flown, 409 across 3 wars. He became one of the most decorated pilots in American history. McGee died on January 16, 2022, at age 102. In his later years, he traveled constantly, speaking at schools, air shows, military bases, telling the story of the Tuskegee Airmen to new generations. He always emphasized the same lesson Davis had taught them: discipline over glory, duty over personal achievement, bring the people you are protecting home safely. Roscoe Brown, who shot down that Me-262 over Berlin, earned a Distinguished Flying Cross for that mission. After the war, he earned a doctorate in education, became president of Bronx Community College in New York, and spent decades advocating for educational opportunity. He died in July 2016 at age 94. In his later years, he gave hundreds of interviews about his experiences. He always said the most important thing about the Tuskegee Airmen was not that they were black pilots. The most important thing was that they did their job better than anyone else. Lee Archer, whose 5th aerial victory was disputed and never officially confirmed, stayed in the Air Force until 1970. He later worked in corporate America, became a venture capitalist, and helped create opportunities for black businesses. He remained active with Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated, the veterans organization, until his death in January 2010 at age 90. Archer always maintained he shot down 5 enemy aircraft, making him the only black ace of World War II. The Air Force never officially confirmed the 5th kill, but whether he had 4 or 5 did not change what mattered. He had stayed with the bombers. He had brought them home. In 2015, the United States Military Academy at West Point announced that a new cadet barracks would be named Davis Barracks in honor of Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. The academy that had silenced him for 4 years as a cadet now honored him with one of its largest buildings. In 2019, the United States Air Force Academy named its airfield Davis Airfield in his honor. These recognitions came long after his death, but they represented institutional acknowledgement of his achievements and his role in transforming American military culture. The Tuskegee Airmen story is often told as a story about race. It is that. But it is also a story about mission focus, tactical discipline, and choosing collective success over individual recognition. The Red Tails faced a choice that many organizations face: pursue metrics that benefit individuals or pursue metrics that benefit the mission. They chose the mission. They stayed with the bombers when other groups chased kills. They protected formations when other groups pursued glory. They brought people home. That choice cost them aerial victories. It cost them aces. It cost them the kind of recognition fighter pilots traditionally sought. But it gave them something more valuable. It gave them the best bomber escort record in the theater. It gave them the trust of the men they protected. And it gave them evidence, undeniable and quantifiable, that they could perform at the highest level despite a system designed to prevent them from doing so. The distinctive red tails became more than identification markings. They became a symbol of reliability, discipline, and protection. For bomber crews flying through flak and fighters over Germany and Austria and Romania, seeing red tails meant someone was watching over them, someone who would not abandon them, someone who would stay in position no matter what. That promise, that commitment to protecting others even at personal cost, is what the red tails represented. Not perfection, not a myth, but something real and measurable and worthy of remembering. This is what excellence looks like in practice. Not flashy individual heroics, but disciplined commitment to mission success. Not seeking recognition, but earning trust through consistent performance. Not perfect, but demonstrably better by the metrics that actually mattered. The Tuskegee Airmen proved that excellence under pressure can overcome institutional barriers and change history. They did it by staying focused on their mission while others chased glory. They did it by protecting bombers when the easier choice would have been to pursue enemy fighters. They did it by being better at the job than anyone else, even when the system tried to prevent them from doing the job at all. That is the legacy worth preserving. Not a myth about never losing bombers, but the truth about a group of pilots who lost fewer bombers than anyone else because they chose mission success over personal glory. That truth is more powerful than any myth, and that lesson about priorities, discipline, and mission focus remains relevant far beyond the specific circumstances of World War II fighter operations. It is a lesson about what it takes to achieve excellence when excellence is your only path to proving you deserve the opportunity to serve. If you found this story compelling, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we would love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you are watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you are part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.